Hi everyone, we'll be waiting 2 to 3 minutes before starting the webinar, just to allow folks to join as there may be middle of the connecting. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Valentin Kolika and I will be your host for today. Just a few reminders before we start with the webinar. If you have issues viewing the stream at any time during the presentation and you're using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. If you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security-webinars, and all the links that I'll be mentioning here, they're also posted on the IM window. Closed captions in several languages are available during the live broadcast, so you can enable them by clicking on the CC button located at the lower right corner of your screen. Feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window by simply clicking on the Ask a Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. Now, we often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. In the event, if the answer was not provided, or if you may have additional questions post the event, please don't hesitate to raise them on our Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. If you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place to ask a question. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars, and you can make that impact by going to aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. I would also like to take the opportunity to invite you to join our public community by visiting aka.ms/security-community. That's the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, which you can sign up for at aka.ms/security-prp. Request features, give feedback, review our roadmaps, product roadmaps that is, register for events or join webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is simply by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. In today's session, Sarah Young will guide us through the auditing and monitoring of Azure Sentinel Workspace. Sarah is a senior program manager with our Azure Sentinel team. And without further ado, I will turn it over to her. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. If you can see the time and date in the bottom of my screen, it's quite early for me here, though I am on Friday, so I guess that's a little bit of an improvement. Thanks for making the time to join me today. My name's Sarah Young. I'm a senior program manager on the Sentinel team, as Fallon just said, and today I wanted to talk to you about auditing and monitoring your Sentinel workspace. It's something that's a pretty important topic. It comes up a lot. It's a thing that a lot of organizations need to do. So I'm just going to show you how you can do that, the sort of queries you can run, and yeah, probably won't take a full hour, which is nice, but just wanted to show you how you can get that in place if it's something that you need to do. So to start with, why would you audit and monitor your Sentinel workspace? There's lots of reasons. Obviously, you can understand who is using your Sentinel instance in your workspace. You can look at what tables are being queried. You can look at things like which queries are taking the longest. You can also monitor what's known as CIUD or CRUD, create, read, update, delete actions on your Sentinel instance. And the reason this is important for most businesses and organizations is to adhere to internal security standards. You may need to you may have an internal standard that says that systems need to be monitored, or you may be, depending on your vertical and where you're located in the world, you may need to provide this reporting as part of external regulatory requirements, particularly in highly regulated industries like the government and the financial sector. They tend to have some regulations around this. Of course, it is important because, of course, somebody has to, your SIEM, your Sentinel instance is of course monitoring everything else you do in your organization, but of course that it's important not to forget that someone needs to monitor the people who are monitoring. I know that's, yeah, getting a little bit inception, but you know what I mean. And it is a very important thing to do. You need to know, you need to be sure that someone's, people are doing what they're supposed to be doing on your Sentinel workspace. No one's abusing it, but also it can be a really good tool to identify training requirements. If someone's running some really long, inefficient queries, that could be a way that you determine, who needs additional training. So it's not just about spying on people. So yeah, essentially, as I said, what we want to do here is understand the who, what, where, when for your Sentinel instance, or instances, of course, because this isn't necessarily limited to one workspace. Two main sources of data that we would use to monitor your Sentinel workspace. One is your log analytics query logs. That's a relatively new feature we've introduced in the last 6 months or so into the log analytics product, and Azure Activity. Now, Azure Activity is something that we log for everything throughout the whole of Azure. So you can get Azure Activity for lots of different well, basically everything in Azure will generate Azure Activity logs, and you can find those in a log analytics workspace by default. Log analytics query logs do need to be turned on, and there's an ingestion cost associated with this, so you do need to be mindful of that. But it's just important to remember Azure Activity is on by default, whereas log analytics query logs, you do need to go turn them on. So how do we query these logs? I have done a nice GIF here, or GIF, on how you query these logs. It's essentially the same as everything else. But first of all, what I wanted to show you, going to the demo, because that's much more fun, is I'm just going to show you how you can actually get these, you can actually put log analytics logs into the query logs into Sentinel. You'll have to forgive me. It's like, as you can see, it's 5 a.m. for me, so I'm going to use that as an excuse. But what you do is you come to your log analytics workspace, come to diagnostic settings, and you can see here that you can add a diagnostic setting. Now, this is something that you might have used before, but what you can do here is, and this is something that the diagnostic settings is something that we have in many different Azure resources, and this is how you can configure things to be sent into your log analytics workspace. So essentially here, we can hit the audit. We can give this a diagnostic setting name. So call it test. And then you can send this to various different places. It's worth mentioning here that although, of course, in order to query it in Sentinel, you need to send it to a log analytics workspace to do that. What you can also do here is you can archive to a storage account, so you can just put it in blob. It might be because of cost factors. You just want to archive it rather than have it available for querying at all times. Or if you want to send this to a third-party place, you can actually also stream to an event hub. And if I clicked an event hub here, I can actually select an event hub, and that could stream out of Azure to a third-party place if you're using some third-party tools. So that's just worth mentioning as well. But coming back to the more exciting thing, which is looking at the logs. So what we can see here is the first table I'll look at is Azure Activity. Now I'm just going to take 10, just take the first 10 records out of this. But also I'm going to be doing another where operator, because we need to have operation name value contains security insights. So because Azure Activity, as I was saying earlier, Azure Activity goes across the whole of Azure. So if I just did Azure Activity take 10, I'd actually see Azure Activity for every single Azure resource that's actually being logged in this workspace. So where the operation name value containing security insights, that's the Sentinel part. You may have noticed, you can see it at the top here in our URL, that when you access Sentinel, it's called, the blade is actually called Microsoft Azure Security Insights. That's actually what Sentinel was known as internally before we gave it the name Sentinel, and that's why you still see that name in our APIs and endpoints. So just in case you were wondering why it's not called Sentinel, it's actually called Security Insights. And just for your information, log analytics has the same thing. In Azure Activity, it's actually known as operational insights. So yeah, just an FYI there. But if we have a look at the contents of the log, of course, I've just taken the first 10 that are Sentinel. You can see here we've been doing check user authorization and license. This is an admin task. We've got the HTTP request and more JSON. This is a fairly typical Azure Activity log here. But more importantly here, generally, for the purposes of what we're talking about here, you'd be wanting to look at the operation name to see what operation has actually taken place here. here. We can also see if it's just an informational or if it's failed. That's an interest. This one here is actually a bit more interesting because you can see it's unauthorized. So whatever that person's been trying to do there, it looks like they don't have permissions. And so that's a quick look at the Azure activity. Now, if we look at LA query audit logs, they are different. These are 100% focused on the workspace that they're coming from. And what they're doing here is just telling you precisely what's happening. So you can see here, there's we've got the user that's kicked off a query. We've got the start time, the end time, the actual text of the query, and actually what KQL has been actually been used here. And then we've got the usual, what subscription and workspace it was against, the response code, which we'd hope was a 200. And then we've also got some stats here around how long it took to respond. And from the data process and data process end, you can work out how long the query's taking. So that's very, very quickly the structure of the logs that we're looking at. Again, in terms of querying, there's not too much to say apart from you query these just like everything else. Now, of course, it's not very nice just to run queries all the time, as one would expect. That's not a particularly nice way of doing things. So what we've created and what you should be able to see in your you should be able to see this in your UI as a template now, is the Workspace audit book, workbook. Now, we created this to actually run some queries that use these two tables, and it should be able to give you an idea of the kind of typical activities that you might want to be able to audit within your workspace. So for example, here you can see I've got the time range of the last 14 days, but here we can see how many queries have been run on the workspace, the users that have been running those queries. So we can see the top queries there. I can see a couple of folks in my team who have been running a lot of queries on this workspace in the last 2 weeks. We can also have a look at the users with failed queries. Now, how we do that is I showed you on the LA query audit logs that most things were getting a 200 response. So that's a 200 OK response. So that means that the query has run successfully. But if the query hasn't run successfully, it may give a different error code. Now, depending on what that error code is, it might be a timeout, but most likely it could be a query that isn't actually written properly. So it's actually failed when we've tried to submit the KQL. Now, we actually have here a list of the most failed queries. And this is something, again, going slightly away from maybe picking up attackers. This gives us an idea of perhaps maybe where there might be some training that needs to happen. If someone's running a lot of failed queries, it could be indicative of that. We've also got here, we've got the number of failed queries by error code. So you can see there's lots of different, there are different responses here. Generally a 400 is that it's the wrong KQL, but there can be other things in there that can cause queries to fail.
Hey, Sarah, sorry to interrupt. We have an ask if you can just zoom in a little in the screen.
Oh, sure. Yes. Apologies.
Thank you.
Now, is that, let me just, is that better? I'll wait for a second just so we can check before I keep going. If whoever wrote that comment, if you're able to say if that looks better for you, otherwise I can zoom in a bit more.
We can continue as is, and then we'll find out soon, I guess, here.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if you're still not able to see this, then please do let me know. What I'll do is I'll just go back and show you the last couple of tabs then zoomed in a bit more. Hopefully that's more helpful. I forget that sometimes the resolution doesn't translate well, so apologies. But you can see we've got the number of queries this is over the last 2 weeks here, and then we've got the top query users. So who's been querying your workspace the most? As I said, on the failed queries, we've got the users with the most failed queries in the last 2 weeks and what error and what codes they've actually failed with. The next one's an interesting one. This is the query run performance. So this is giving us an idea of the longest running queries in your workspace. So it tells you, what user has actually run this query, what the query text is, and then the query runtime, and this is in milliseconds. So you can see here that there's a couple of particularly intensive queries there, and so that could be an opportunity for more training, or just to see if you can optimize some of those queries, because 143,000 milliseconds is quite a long time for query execution. Normally we'd be expecting, as you can see, significantly less there. Another thing we can look at here, if you need to dig into a particular user, you can actually have a look at the different users coming from Azure AD who are set up, and then you can see how many query runs they've run. So I'll pick on one of my teammates. We can see here all the queries that he's run, when he started them, when they ended, what the text was, and he has only just run he's only run 59 in the last 14 days. Let me see if I change that to the last 30 days, if he's run any more. Oh no, but then it is the holidays, so it has been the holidays, so maybe not. But basically, you can get an idea here. You're able to plot how many query runs someone is using. So it might be if someone's running an awful lot of queries on your workspace, you can just have a look at precisely what they're doing and the frequency. That's often useful if it's an unexpected number of queries. In terms of Query Explorer, this is actually a time brushing graph. So what we can do here is dig into a particular time period, and then coming down the bottom, we can actually have a look in that time period who ran which queries at which time. It's also still got that same summary at the bottom of the users and how many queries they've run overall. So again, this workbook isn't showing you, you can see here there was actually more than 250 queries in this time period. So potentially I should make it a bit smaller, the window that I'm looking at. But you can see here there's a lot of different queries being run. Again, just another way to look into them if you're not, especially if you're not too sure what you're looking for. And you can see, as you'd expect here, we can see on Fridays and going into the weekend, the query numbers are significantly lower. And then going back up into the week, the queries get much higher. And then again, they dip down at the weekend, which is typically what we'd expect to see. Of course, if you're running a 24-hour SOC capability, maybe you wouldn't see such a significant dip in the query runs, but it's certainly possible. It's certainly not an unusual behavior from that perspective. The last part of this workbook is looking at your CIUD or CRUD operations. Now, this is something that is probably, I wouldn't say is more important, but this is the kind of thing you should possibly monitor for. This is the kind of thing you should be monitoring for potential abuse, because if someone was going to attack your SIEM, it's quite likely they would probably maybe want to amend your rules or delete the rules or create new rules to hide the activity they're doing. So what we can see here is we can see who's been deleting things in the workspace, we can see who's been making things, and we can see who's been updating things as well. So of course, if this were your SOC maintenance team, you'd expect to see their names in here. If you're seeing things you don't recognize, or you're seeing a lot of changes that you wouldn't typically see, that could be indicative of something amiss in the environment. And also I showed you in the logs earlier the unauthorized requests. Now, this graph is actually logging those unauthorized requests and seeing who has the most. It would be indicative if an account is trying to do a lot of unauthorized activity on a workspace, that it could be very much indicative of someone who maybe needs some more training, or perhaps that account has been compromised and someone is trying to see what they can do on the account and push the limits of the permissions that they've been given. So again, it's something that's worth keeping an eye on. It may be something that you need to investigate. It may not be. As with most things in security, it can go either way, but at least using auditing activities, you can get an idea of what's happening. So back to the slides. I mean, I've just shown you all of this, the workbook. You should find this in your UI already as a template if you're interested in using it. But if not, then it's if not, then it is available on our GitHub repo as well. It has been there for a little while though, so hopefully you shouldn't have problems finding it in the UI. But yeah. As I said, this was going to be a short and sweet one. It's an important one, and precisely what you want to look at here is what you'll want to look at as an organization may differ a bit, but using this workbook as a starting point, it will certainly give you a good solid idea of what's happening in your workspace and what you may need to look at. So I've got a few more useful resources on the side here. This presentation is based on a blog post that I did a few months ago. There's also a blog post from the log analytics team on the tech community talking about it from that perspective, and also to get a full list of the audit data you can get from the query logs. I've linked to the Microsoft documents there, and I think this is a good opportunity to go to questions. As I said, there was going to be this is a short but sweet one, and there's probably hopefully I know my colleagues have been answering questions, but Valon, was there anything pertinent that you think is worth answering on the webinar live now?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, by the way. So the question is, can abnormal activities trigger email alert?
Yes, they totally could. So I'll actually show you, because why not? So what you could do is these logs are exactly the same as any other log in Sentinel. And so what that means is you could write an analytics rule for it. And in the blog post, I've actually done one of those. So let's pop it in. So we could create a scheduled query rule here. So we could say sort of test rule for webinar test, and then in the rule logic, what I could write here, I'll show you what I've got here, is we're saying look at the log analytics query logs audit table, and where the query text contains, and you could put here like a name of a sensitive table, you could then actually run this as a detection. So you can say, in the last day, if we've seen anyone query this sensitive table, please raise that as an incident and give me back their email address, their query text, and then tell me who the user was and what query they ran. And then if this is in an analytics rule, of course, we can put an automated response to that. So an automated response could include an email, a message in Teams, etc. So it's absolutely possible that if you wanted to be a bit more proactive than just using a workbook, you could certainly create some analytics rules around these from these tables to actually create incidents that your SOC team could go and actually look at and proactively investigate if necessary. So yep, definitely. Right. Definitely that is a possibility with these. Good question.
And we have another one. What level of access does a user need to have in order to view these logs?
That's also a good question. That's going to depend on how you set up your workspace. So Sentinel permissions. Essentially, we have 3 Sentinel built-in roles. Now, Sentinel if you've got access to Sentinel, you can access, and you're using those built-in roles, you have access to all the tables in that workspace. So it depends where you choose to send these logs to. So ideally, what you would, so you could either put them in the same workspace as everything else, but what we recommend doing from a best practices perspective is that if you need a SOC capability on some sensitive tables, whether it's the query rules here or whether it's any other sensitive data in your organization, then we'd recommend that you spin that off to a separate workspace where you can very tightly control the permissions on that workspace and perhaps only give access to a certain subset of your SOC. It might be the people, whoever monitors the actual monitoring people, and we do recommend that as a architectural best practice. So it's not a case of what permissions you need to give it, it's where you choose to import these tables to, and then what permissions you put over those tables, which is a more important consideration. Hopefully you follow that.
Okay, thank you. I always tend to send folks to the to Azure Sentinel pricing website when there's questions about pricing, and if you don't know the answer to this one, that's absolutely fine. So there's a question about, since the license is calculated per gigabyte, will the audit logs be calculated into it?
Azure, so it's a good question. It's important. Now, I can't give you a 100% concrete answer in terms of how much it will cost you, but what I can tell you is that Azure activity logs are free to ingest. They don't cost any money. The log analytics query audit logs, they do have a cost associated with them. Now, how much data, and you're absolutely right that Sentinel and log analytics is entirely priced on the volume of data that you ingest. So it's going to depend a bit on how busy your workspace is and how many queries people are running as to how many logs are going to be generated. Now, of course, that's not great for understanding and calculating, but what you can do is you could turn them on for a period of time, say a week, and then it's possible to run and then actually just monitor. And we've got many workbooks you can do this with, monitor the size of that table, and then you'll be able to work out roughly how much you're ingesting for your environment, and then do some pricing appropriately. The diagnostics, where I showed you how to turn on the log analytics diagnostic logs, you can just go and turn that off straight away. And I definitely recommend, if you're starting off with Sentinel, a great thing to do here is measure this during your 31-day free trial. I'll say that with an asterisk because we can't actually, because obviously I don't have a slide on this, but with the Sentinel 31 free day trial, remember that you only get 5 gigabytes of free ingestion at the log analytics level, which is where this would add into. So make sure not to go over 5 gig, otherwise you do start getting charges at the log analytics layer. But you could, of course, set up a new workspace, monitor for that month, see how much ingestion you get. This is a great rule for any data, by the way, and then that should help you cost, roughly how much ingestion you will have on your different tables, including this one, which would give you an idea of pricing. Again, apologies, I can't give you a concrete answer, but hopefully that helps.
No, this is great, and hopefully that helped you. And thanks for the details. We'll take this as a last question now. You mentioned log data can be sent to storage account. Can LA query run against the storage blob? And if not, what steps is required in order to query archived log data?
Oh, now that's a really good question. Now there's a couple of different options here. Now, it is possible. If you send things straight to blob storage, it is possible to query them. We have a KQL operator that references external data. And you can essentially refer up to something stored in blob and run queries. It is not, it's a bit of a hack. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not intended. It's intended to refer things possibly for watch lists rather than just an alternative for putting things in log analytics, but I have seen people manage to query it. I would go and look if you want to search the KQL external data operator, it is possible to run queries on data that's in blob. It's not the easiest thing in the world though. It's the alternative is you bring things into log analytics. Of course, there's a cost associated with that. And the other option is to look at putting things in Azure Data Explorer. One of my colleagues wrote, and I will show you, a couple of months ago, wrote a great blog on how you can send things to Azure Data Explorer for long-term storage. Now, that's a really good option because Azure Data Explorer still uses KQL. You don't need to learn anything else. But for logs that you may not need to query regularly, it might be worthwhile sending it to Data Explorer because Data Explorer has a different pricing model. It's around the retention and the compute power as opposed to the ingest, how much you ingest. And so for more long-term retention without the Sentinel overlay, if you just need to do a bit of querying, Azure Data Explorer might be worth investigating too. So as you can see, there's a blog post on that, so I recommend you go check that out.
Great. So as Sarah mentioned, this is meant to be short and sweet information on Sentinel. And so we're wrapping up here, but there's more incoming questions. And what I'll do, Sarah, I'll just send those out to you. You can, what we normally do, at least with Sentinel webinars, you can always come back to us and update the deck on the last slide to reply to the questions that were not answered, or the community, the folks can go as usual to the Azure Sentinel forum. In case you have additional questions, you can obviously raise them there at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. Now, just wanted to provide you a quick reminder. We've been receiving lately lots of inquiries about the Solarigate. And we next Thursday on January 28th, that is, we're hosting a special session on protecting, detecting, and responding to Solarigate using Microsoft 365 Defender. And for details and registration, please visit us on aka.ms/security webinars. And I would like to close this webinar by thanking Sarah for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answering the questions. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.